Tap the Distinguished delegates, can I request all of you to please take your seats? We will be starting the 201st session of the General Council very shortly. So I ask you all to please take your seats and be ready for the session of the Council. Thank you. Dear delegates, please settle down. We will be starting in exactly 1 minute. So I seek your cooperation. We have a limited amount of time this morning, so please settle down. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, as we prepare ourselves to commence the session of the Governing Council, you know that there are certain rules and protocols that have to be followed. And one of this relates to establishing the quorum for this council. So my colleagues from the IPU Secretariat will be going around to each of the delegations. So if you could have your badges ready, your identity badges, that would be very helpful. Thank you. A very good morning, distinguished delegates. I call to order the 201st session of the Governing Council. This is the first sitting that is being held here in St. Petersburg, and so the Council is now in session. Let me again extend a very warm welcome to all of you. It is wonderful to be here in this enchanting city, and we will now proceed with the business of the Council. You already have with you a list of the agenda items. I suggest that we take items 1 to 6 and then item 7, which is the draft program and budget for 2018. As you know that this is an agenda item that has to be approved by the Council. So ladies and gentlemen, we have exactly less than 2 hours for our sitting today. So we need to proceed quickly. But before proceeding, let me make an announcement concerning the circulation of documents during this session. As you know, and in keeping with our paper smart policy, as well as our green assemblies, the assembly in Dhaka that we had was in fact an attempt to have a green assembly. We will have confirmation of that. We are in fact circulating fewer printed documents before you. May I remind you that we are publishing as many documents as possible on the IPU website. Please use your personal computers and portable devices to access these documents. Some documents, such as reports from specialized meetings, are now available exclusively on the IPU website. If you need printed copies, you can use the print-on-demand service that has been provided by the host parliament. I therefore urge you to please keep your documents until the end of the assembly. We are not going to redistribute them and increase the volume of paper that we generate. Thank you for your cooperation and understanding in this regard. Now let us start with item 1, adoption of the agenda and proposals for the election of the President of the 137th Assembly. May I take it that we can adopt the agenda? It is so adopted. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, in keeping with our usual practice, the Parliament of the host Parliament is usually elected as the President of the Assembly, taking place in the host country. May I therefore ask one of you good members to nominate Ms. Valentina Matvienko as President of the 137th Assembly of the IPU, and another member to second that nomination. I acknowledge UAE.
Pakistan. Bangladesh.
I've acknowledged UAE.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning to all the delegations here. As we are starting with our Governing Council and works of the 137th Assembly of the IPU, I would like to propose that Madam Valentina Matvienko to be the President of the Assembly and the President of the Governing Council for this session. We first would like to thank her for her sincere and continuous efforts and leadership that we have witnessed all through the years, and especially through the organization of such prestigious and such a highly organized gathering and assembly. So the UAE would like to propose that Madam Valentina would be the president of the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amal Al-Kubaisi, the Speaker from the Federal Council of the United Arab Emirates. I see Argentina wishes to say something on this. You have raised your hand. Argentina.
Buenos días.
Good morning, Mr. President. Argentina would like to second the proposal that the Speaker of the Russian Federation Chamber be President of the Assembly, and let me take this opportunity to thank her for the warm welcome extended to us in this great country. Thank you.
Very much, Senator Federico Pinedo, the Speaker of the Senate from Argentina. So, members of the Council, we have Bangladesh. Did you want to speak? Because we already have someone proposing and someone seconding.
But since it is supported by Argentina, so we did not speak. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, the Honorable Deputy Speaker from Bangladesh. So, members of the Council, we have Dr. Amal Al-Kubaisi, the Chairperson of the Federal Council of the UAE, proposing and nominating Ms. Valentina Matvienko to be the President of the 137th Assembly. We have Senator Federico Pinedo, the Chairman of the Senate from Argentina, who seconds the nomination. The Council therefore recommends that the Assembly elect Ms. Valentina Matvienko as its President. Thank you very much, and our congratulations to you, Ms. Matvienko. This has been a wonderful show, and it is our pleasure to have you, a pleasure and an honor to have you as the President. Thank you so much. Let us now proceed with item 2, approval of the summary records of the 200th session of the Governing Council held on the 1st and 5th of April 2017 in Dhaka. This document has been distributed to all members and posted on the IPU website as far back as in January. No, sorry, that's not right. It was posted actually in July, so that will be a correction. The Assembly only took place in March and April, so it's not January, it's July 2017. And the reference document is CL/200/SR.1. The Secretariat has received no corrections to the summary records. May I therefore take it that the Council wishes to approve the summary records? It is so approved and decided. We now move on to item 3, questions relating to IPU membership. And item 3A, request for affiliation and re-affiliation to the IPU. To date, we have received 3 formal requests for re-affiliation to present to you from the parliaments of Vanuatu, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. The Executive Committee has examined these requests and recommends that you approve them. May I take it that you wish to approve the request of Vanuatu, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan to join the Inter-Parliamentary Union? Okay, I take it that you so approve the request. Uzbekistan. So first I give it to Vanuatu.
No, Uzbekistan wanted to speak.
No, Uzbekistan is here. No, first it will be Vanuatu. Okay, so I will now invite leaders of the delegations of each of these three parliaments to say a few words, and I first call upon Mr. Edwin Amblus, the first Deputy Speaker of Vanuatu, to say a few words. Vanuatu, you have the floor. Can you please raise your hand, Vanuatu, if you're in the room? The delegation, okay, we shall move on. May I invite Speaker Agja from Turkmenistan to say a few words. Oh.
Уважаемый председатель, уважаемые участники Ассамблеи, дамы и господа.
Ladies and distinguished chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my satisfaction with your decision to adopt Turkmenistan as a member of IPU. We receive this event as a very important page in the history of our state. On behalf of the President of Turkmenistan, Mr. Nurmuhamedov, and the people of Turkmenistan, I am honored and privileged to extend thanks to you and say that Turkmenistan, as a peaceful and neutral state, will meet all the commitments which are the part of the statute of this international organization and contribute into its activities. Distinguished colleagues, friends, Turkmenistan attaches much importance to the work of IPU as the largest and the most representative international platform on which international diplomacy is carried out, and be the member of this authoritative organization, and we will contribute to further cooperation in a legislative field and development of parliamentarism and strengthening peace and security in the world and achieving sustainable development goals defined by UN. Distinguished chairman, distinguished colleagues, Turkmenistan welcomes close international cooperation with parliamentarians both bilaterally and multilaterally in dealing with the most topical issues of modernity, and we seek to achieve the highest ideal of justice and peace, and we'll do our best to deal with the most pressing issues. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Speaker Agja, and it's a delight and an honor to welcome you to IPU's growing family. May I now move on and request the leader of the delegation from Uzbekistan, Mr. Saidov Akmal, who is chairman of the committee, to say a few words. And in order to save time, may I request that you speak from where you are seated? Okay. You're very welcome, since you're already here. Thank you.
Distinguished chairman of IPU, distinguished secretary general, distinguished leader organizations, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, allow me to extend thanks to IPU for a reaffiliation of Uzbekistan with IPU. I take the opportunity to congratulate Ms. Valentina Matviyenko for her election as president of 137th Assembly and hospitality that they showed to us. It is symbolic that our sitting is taking place in historical building Tavritsky Palace, which retains the spirit of Russian parliamentarism, and it is built in the traditions of Russian architectural classical style. And of course, we belong to history. We have this feeling of history because we're here in this Dumsky Hall, distinguished members of the Assembly. Now, there is in St. Petersburg, you can see the ghost of parliamentarism, both at international, global levels. The role of parliaments is growing. We have more than 200 national parliaments, and we have more than 70 international organizations. The most authoritative organization is Inter-Parliamentary Union, and we can see such a thing as the large-scale cooperation of international parliamentarism and we see different dimensions of its development. It's the creation of parliamentary organizations, and the second dimension is the creation of inter-parliamentary dialogue. It is a very important factor of development of international relations and securing peace in the world. Distinguished members of the Council, we can speak about the spirit of international parliamentarism, and Uzbekistan will be a decent member of this family. And I would like, on behalf of the President of Uzbekistan and the Speaker of the Senate, to convey my best regards to the participants of this Assembly. I wish fruitful work for this Assembly. Thank you for your attention.
Honorable Said of Akmal.
Muchas gracias al señor Said Ahmad, que ha intervenido en nombre de Uzbekistán. Y para nosotros es un placer darle la bienvenida aquí a esta familia de la UIP. Tenemos 3 nuevos miembros, por lo tanto, eso quiere decir que ahora contamos con 176 parlamentos miembros del mundo. Supongo que sabrán que la membresía universal es un objetivo que se ha fijado la UIP, un objetivo que tenemos desde hace ya tiempo, y ahora poco a poco estamos acercándonos a ese objetivo. Para mí es un placer particular porque cuando yo asumí la presidencia hace 3 años, bueno, pues teníamos menos miembros, ahora ya hemos llegado a 176 miembros. Hemos logrado 10 miembros nuevos en un plazo de 3 años. Me parece que es impresionante y quiero dar las gracias a la secretaria de la UIP por el excelente trabajo que han hecho. Y también a nuestro anfitrión, porque ha intentado que se sumen algunos de los vecinos. Yo ahora quiero que ustedes utilicen su energía para intentar ampliar nuestra membresía en los próximos años. Esperemos que así sea. Nosotros, los miembros del Consejo, también hemos recibido una solicitud para estatus de asociación de la Asamblea Parlamentaria del Mar Negro. Se considera que es correcta la solicitud y se ha pedido que se apruebe, por lo tanto, dicha solicitud para esta Asamblea Parlamentaria de la Cooperación Económica del Mar Negro. Presento entonces esta propuesta. Queda aprobada. Gracias. Y ahora tiene la palabra Ramazan Khan, que es el vicepresidente. Vicepresidente de PAPSEC intervendrá ahora.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Distinguidos miembros del Consejo Directivo, para mí realmente es un honor haber recibido el estatus de miembro asociado en esta unión interparlamentaria. Nuestra Asamblea incluye a 12 países. El Mar Negro es un lugar muy importante para el mundo porque está en el cruce de arterias de transporte muy importante, en la ruta de la seda. Es una región muy importante en recursos energéticos. Pero lo más valioso de la región del Mar Negro son sus pueblos, diferentes naciones con diferentes culturas y distintas religiones. Y nosotros estamos muy satisfechos en el marco de PAPSEC, porque tenemos una relación de tolerancia entre nuestros países. Nosotros queremos trabajar por nuestro futuro gracias a la cooperación. Recibir este estatus de miembro asociado nos brinda una oportunidad para mejorar las relaciones entre los países. Y en el marco de la UIP hemos podido establecer buenas relaciones con otras asambleas parlamentarias. Muchas gracias de nuevo. Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Ramazan Khan, Vice President of PEPSEC. Ladies and gentlemen, may I also share with you at this juncture that we have 2 observer delegations amongst us who are also looking at the possibility of future affiliation. And these are from the Marshall Islands and St. Lucia. We hope to welcome them to our fold very soon, and I'm sure you will all have a chance to interact with them. Please do share your experiences and the values that you feel your membership in the IPU brings to your own parliaments. Item 3B, ladies and gentlemen, is the issue of achieving universal membership.
There is no Spanish interpretation, so maybe ask the Spanish delegates whether they can hear anything.
I've just been advised that with regard to interpretation, there are some issues concerning Spanish. Is it working now? Yes? Mr. Alande is from Chile, tells us it's working. No issues with Spanish? Everyone is happy? Great. So I was moving on to agenda item 3B, which is achieving universal membership. Now, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, as I've just mentioned, we are aspiring to achieve universal membership. And we are extremely proud to see, with your help, that our membership is growing every year. I take it you have all read this document, so I now give the floor to the Secretary General to explain the background to this proposal.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As you have just said, this document has been circulated to all members of Council. You have just admitted 3 new members, and Mr. President, you yourself have mentioned that a lot of efforts have gone into encouraging new membership within the IPU in order to achieve universal membership of the IPU. Your Executive Committee and Council subsequently have reviewed the worrying situation of a number of members of the IPU who are unable to pay their assessed contributions to the budget of the organization. And in examining this situation, Mr. President, you have realized that sometimes and very often it is not because those members don't want to pay, but it is because they are facing a number of crises, financial, political and otherwise. And you have therefore decided that it would be better to examine these situations on a case-by-case basis. But your principle now, Mr. President, is that instead of suspending members who are in arrears of their contribution, you want to devise a mechanism whereby you can keep their membership in abeyance and encourage payment later. So this document that you have in front of you explains what the conditions under which currently members can be suspended from the organization. Those conditions include unconstitutional dissolution of the parliament concerned. They include failure to pay contributions to the budget for 3 or more years under Article 5 of the statute. I see somebody raising a piece of paper there. Is there a problem, sir? No? So, Mr. President, we have looked into the situation that applies in other organizations and see how they deal with the issue of areas of contribution. And our first port of call was the United Nations, and there we realized that once you join the United Nations, you never really get suspended from the organization. What the organization does is it suspends your right as a member, but they don't suspend your membership. And it is that approach that we are proposing that the IPU adopt, which means that if, of course, your parliament is unconstitutionally dissolved, then your membership lapses within the IPU until such time as the parliament is restored. But we are suggesting, and the executive committee decided to recommend, that members no longer be suspended on account of not having paid their contributions for 3 or more years. So you have this document that presents a flexible solution to the problem. Mr. President, you may want to read out the new provisions as they are here so that everybody is clear about this issue of membership.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. So let me just capture in brief the principles that are recommended for this new approach. Number one, IPU membership of a member parliament will no longer be suspended for non-payment of assessed contributions. Number two, IPU membership will be suspended only if a member parliament is unconstitutionally dissolved and consequently the governing council decides to suspend it, or if a member specifically requests to leave the organization. Number three, once a member of the IPU is 3 or more years in arrears in the payment of its contributions and cannot convince the executive committee that condition beyond its control contributed to its inability to pay, it will be moved to the status of non-performing member. Number four, a non-participating member will not be entitled to attend IPU statutory meetings, to vote or hold any IPU office. So it's a non-performing, non-participating member. Every effort will be made with the support of the geopolitical groups to engage with members in arrears. All decisions to restrict members' participation rights are to be taken on a case-by-case basis. So there is no general standard, it is on a case-by-case basis. A non-participating member would resume its rights to participate in IPU statutory meetings, vote, and hold an IPU office upon payment of its arrears according to the same set of rules currently applicable for the reaffiliation of members that have been suspended under Article 5.3 of the IPU statutes. So those are basically the principles. As the Secretary General has explained, and it is important for each member to understand this, we are differentiating between membership and rights that accrue from that membership. So we are not going to suspend basic membership, but we are going to suspend the rights that one has under that membership. And this is a practice that is followed in the United Nations. If the arrears go beyond 3 years, then you become a non-participating member, So you don't lose your membership, but you're not able to participate in the works of the union. So this is essentially what the proposal is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So you put to council that they approve this recommendation, and if they do that, Mr. President, then we would identify those relevant provisions of the statutes that we need to amend, and we will propose amendments to the statutes to you at the next session of Council, which will take place in March 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. So what we are calling upon or requesting now is to have your approval in principle to proceed with this approach. And once we have that in principle approval, when we meet during the course of the next assembly in Geneva in March or April, we are going to then come up with recommended amendment to the rules, which you will then adopt in the Council. May I take it that this is how you wish to proceed? Thank you. Now let me move on to Sweden. Sweden. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think I understand the way that you want to make a solution of the problem. But in my mind, aren't we at the same time creating another problem? I want to have a system where it is simple to understand what the rules that we are working in and under. So by doing this, you have to go into the different circumstances, but at the same time, those decisions will be compared with each other's. Up till now, I think we have an easy way of solving the problem. Now I think we will create another problem. So please look into that more carefully in the future, because in the end, we are depending on the money that is in the core budget. And the only core budget that we are certain of is what different countries contribute with their membership. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph, for that observation. I acknowledge Chile.
I agree with the proposal from the Secretary General. But what concerns me in particular at present within GRULAC is the fact that we are expressing our solidarity with the Venezuelan Assembly. And so my question is as follows. We have a theoretical definition of the suspension of rights when there is a problem encountered by a given country. However, here we have the fact that the Assembly is not abiding by the requisite rights. The President of the Assembly is actually attending this annual meeting. So how are we going to actually implement this new provision? How are we going to take a stance? As you said very ably, I would like to congratulate you on the statement you gave yesterday and also for touching on this topic in terms of the Venezuelan Assembly. How are we going to proceed in this case? How are we going to ensure that our colleagues whose rights are being thwarted by the executive power prevail? We have a definition here which is very important in terms of IPU membership, but how are we going to actually implement these provisions? I think we need to clarify this point, sir. Yesterday, for example, we met with our Venezuelan colleague, and indeed, it was clear that there were problems indirectly. Efforts were being made to ensure that they no longer formed a part of the parliament. So I agree, indeed, with the proposal tabled, but I do think, sir, that we need further clarification as to how we're actually going to interpret these new provisions. In your proposal, how is the IPU going to be officially informed of the full situation? How are we going to be able to ascertain what kind of a problem obtains? Who is going to submit the information? Who is going to provide the information? Is it the Assembly, the Parliament in the country in question? I think, sir, therefore, that we have to certainly ensure that the Parliament concerned provides the requisite information to the Secretariat of the IPU. And the Secretariat then, in light of the evidence, would take a decision in terms of ensuring that the rights of the Assembly are fully recognized, while, of course, referring to the executive, which may be violating certain rights. So this is my view, sir, and I do believe that the Secretariat should take note of this.
Thank you, and I'm sure they have been taking note, and these are very valid questions, and I'm glad we are having this discussion in the Council, because that's why it has been brought up. I will ask the Secretary General to respond, but let me say that in a process where we are looking at amending the statutes, there are various phases. The first is we are trying to come up with a situation or a solution which is better than what we had in the past. And I don't think we have the luxury of having a solution that is foolproof and that is 100% what we would like it to be. So what we have now is an in-principle approach. Then, of course, the wording is going to come, the statutes will come, where we have to look at all of these issues that you have raised. And we need to make sure that the wording that we have is absolutely clear. There is no room for any confusion or misinterpretation. But maybe, Martin, you would like to respond very quickly to this very legitimate question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. President, let me respond to what the Chilean delegate has said. We want to clarify that the provisions in the statutes governing unconstitutional dissolution of parliaments are not going to be amended. The organization is going to continue to recognize that fact. We do understand your concern about parliamentary solidarity. In the past, the IPU has taken strong stances against governments that have tried to do away with parliaments, but you have also been realistic in saying that if a parliament has ceased to exist, then it cannot, in practical terms, participate in the work of the organization. We specify that the provisions that will be amended regard the contributions to the budget, the assessed contributions to the budget. We will take into account the comments that you have made when we prepare the amendments. Regarding the comments made by the honorable member from Sweden, yes, we've taken note of that point. Of course, it is from assessed contributions that you have the resources to run the budget. But you will realize that in some cases, those countries that are not paying are, currently we have a number of them, are facing political instability or financial crisis in their countries. And that is why the President was saying that in the new regulations, this will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. If there are compelling reasons to put the membership in abeyance until such time as they're able to pay, then that should be done. But I don't think the rules are saying that you will do these suspensions on, across the board basis. So I suggest, Mr. President, as you've said, that you agree in principle to the approach that you don't suspend a member automatically on account of their not paying their contributions for 3 or more years, and that you remain flexible to look into those situations and identify the compelling reasons. So if you adopt that decision in principle, then we can work out the modalities that take into account the comments that have been made from the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very quickly, Chile, and then I acknowledge Sudan, and then I would like to move on with the agenda, please. You have the floor, sir.
Microphone, please, sir. Microphone, please.
Presidente.
Sir. The interpretation given by Martin, I think, is extremely dangerous for we parliaments here. If I've correctly understood, what Martin is saying is that if there is suspension of the rights of a given parliament, then automatically it's excluded. And I think that's extremely serious, sir, because I believe that the role of the IPU is to protect parliaments. That's its actual role. Because according to what Martin was saying, we couldn't really follow up on this situation if the Venezuelan government says the parliament's not functioning and our colleagues lose the protection that the IPU should foster, then I don't know whether I understood this correctly, but if that's the interpretation of the situation, then I think parliaments would be very seriously weakened. And in my view, our role consists in protecting parliaments and parliamentarians. And this is why I asked for the floor to get some further clarification on this point.
Thank you. Thank you for making that point. Let me make one thing very clear. The statutes as they stand relate to, let us say you have a situation where a dictator or a military dictator assumes power and dissolves a parliament. At that point, you know, that parliament loses its membership of the IPU as per the statutes. That is one aspect. The other aspect is, as I also echoed in my speech last night, we have to stand by parliamentary solidarity, which is why during the course of this assembly, there were, as you are aware, 2 delegations that were submitted with regard to Venezuela. One was from the National Assembly, Mr. Borges submitted that, and the other was done by President Maduro's political party through the mission in Geneva. And we did not recognize that. We have recognized the delegation that was submitted by the Speaker of the National Assembly. So we stand by it. I think in terms of solidarity, we have to be very, very clear that we stand with the parliaments. But the statutes, I think, were contemplating a different scenario. Obviously, if a military dictator, and I'm being very open and candid in true parliamentary style, dissolves a parliament, and then that parliament cannot continue to be a member of the IPU, which is a different proposition. But in terms of solidarity, we are 100% with what you have said, and that is also proven by our actions with regard to Venezuela. Let me move on to Sudan, and then I've seen Germany. Yes, I will. Sudan, you have the floor, and then I will move to Germany.
Thank you, sir. We understand the basic thrust of this amendment as actually sanctioning parliaments even more severely if they fail to pay their contributions. We're depriving Parliament of its right to vote and its right to attend statutory meetings. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that non-payment of contributions and the time during which contributions are not being paid may be very lengthy because parliaments may be experiencing a difficult situation as a result. I believe that we should pay special attention to the manner in which we deal with these arrears. If a parliament is in arrears, does this necessarily lead to the sanctions being mentioned?
If we look at where the monies come from, where do the revenues come from? Krista from Sweden made the point about the core budget. Essentially, we rely on contribution of members, and then sometimes we go and seek outside funding, voluntary funding. And really, the programs and all of the other activities of the IPU are based on the subscriptions, the contributions that we receive from the membership. So we have to be rigid on this point, but also we have flexibility. I mean, if you look at the current scenario, there are about 5 or 6 countries which have not paid their dues. And we are trying to engage with each of them. We are trying to look at their circumstances. We are getting the geopolitical groups involved. So this is a caution that we will continue to exercise. But at the end of the day, unless the member contributions come in, it is going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for the IPU to continue with the work program that it currently has. I move on to Germany, and I'm delighted to see Speaker Lammert is here. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I don't want to prolong this debate, which we probably continue in terms of the emergency item anyway. But I want to express my strong support for the position which the Chilean colleague has made, and I share his concern. We can't take this issue or we should take this issue as serious as it is, and I would like to remind us that the IPU relies fundamentally on principles even more than on financial contributions, and we shouldn't mix one for the other.
Thank you, and I am fully with you in terms of spirit. Kuwait, did you wish, delegation from Kuwait, you wanted to speak? Yes, you have the floor.
President, I would also like to express support for some of the earlier remarks from Sweden, Sudan, Germany, Syria regarding amendments concerning non-payment and its consequences. The amendments are significant. We do need to see some kind of amendment introduced, but we also need to take account of the specific characteristics of each country. We do, of course, wish to express solidarity with countries suffering from a domestic crisis, but at the same time, we do need to ensure that we proceed in a fair manner as we amend the statutes. What circumstances could justify suspension of a member? If there's an infringement of the statutes or a violation of an underlying principle, a UN principle, for instance, what would occur in such a case? We should perhaps go beyond the area of suspension for non-payment and consider other justifications for suspension.
Secretary General.
Thank you, Mr. President. I fully agree with the members here regarding parliamentary solidarity, the principle of parliamentary solidarity. But I realize that maybe the way the points have been presented in this document gives you the idea that certain other measures in the statutes are going to be amended. I would like to clarify again that the measure that is going to be amended regards non-payment of assessed contributions for 3 or more years, which is one of the conditions for suspension of membership within the IPU. Delegates have raised the issue of solidarity, standing with parliaments that are facing pressures and difficulties are unconstitutionally dissolved. That is another debate. If you want to take up that debate and have an amendment to the statutes, to the current provisions of the statutes, then you can have that debate, because the current statutes say that when you are unconstitutionally dissolved, then you lose your membership in the IPU. We are not suggesting in this set of amendments here that that particular one be amended, but I do understand that you may want to open discussion on this, but I don't know, Mr. President, whether you would be able to conclude that discussion here. Thank you.
No, I don't think we'll be able to conclude it, but there are some very fundamental issues that have been raised. Yeah. The issue of the ideals of the IPU, you know, the standards of the IPU, and to be very honest with you, you know, we come across this apparent contradiction when we discuss also with a number of national parliaments. Because if you, as I see it, and I think it's a very important conversation and discussion to have, if you belong to an organization, if you are a member of an organization, it is assumed that you subscribe to the standards and ideals of that organization. Now, you can't, I think, have it both ways, where you belong to an organization and yet you say, when it comes to issues such as human rights or rights of parliamentarians, you are going to look at your national law. I think that is something which everyone should be aware of, because I think sometimes when some of our committees work, this is the response that we get from some parliaments. If we tell them that, look, you are not giving MPs the space to perform their constitutional duties, they say that we are acting as per our national law. So I think these are very fundamental issues that have to be addressed, and we take the spirit of what you say. Maybe when we are trying to come up with the rules, we will keep this in mind, and when you meet in Geneva, the spirit of the discussions, I think, should be reflected in perhaps a new set of principles. And then if that is approved, then we can come up with the rules and statutes. Is everyone comfortable with that? United Kingdom. And finally, Krista. Ian, if you could be very brief, please. I know you always are.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I will be brief. You're quite right. If you're a member of a club, you must follow the rules of the club. When this was set up in 1889, it was very clear it was parliaments talking to parliaments. Of course, Chile has a point, and the Speaker of Germany, but this needs to be modernized. Times have changed. The amount of money we're trying to claw back, as the Secretary General will tell you, is very small indeed. It's tiny figures. We need to keep people engaged. The only way we can have change in any parliamentary democracy or any system we want is by dialogue. Hence the reason we meet here. And I would urge colleagues, as the President has said, we can look at this in Geneva in a new light. But if we can get this through, it gives the Secretary General the power to talk to countries on an objective basis to follow up why they need our help and what we need to do it. So as quickly as we can do that, it will make a difference. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Duly noted. Krista, very quickly, please. Sweden.
Yes, very quickly. I just want to remind you that I know that it is the case today that it's the few countries that are not paying. But I have been in this organization for 15 years. I know a couple of years ago when it was a bigger problem, when there were more countries than today who didn't pay, and those who paid late. I don't want to have that situation again. I want to know how much money is going into the core budget. We have achieved a better situation, but it has also been a hard work doing that. And I don't want to destroy that. So please think of the situation today and what situation we don't want to have in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from the members is that rather than proceeding with drafting of rules for the statute right away, we also take into account the points that you have mentioned, and taking those into account when you meet in Geneva, there'll be a revised proposal. Is that what you want? Yeah, is that what you're all looking for? Okay, because this is a call of the council, so it's for the council to decide. Michael.
Okay, just for the Secretariat. Now you want us to pursue discussions on the issue of non-payment of contributions as well as the unconstitutional dissolution of parliaments. What do you do with these situations? And that we can now prepare a new approach that we can submit to you before any amendments are proposed to the statutes of the organization. Is that it? Because I need to know what you expect of the Secretariat at the end of this meeting. Is that it?
Okay, so members of the council, is that the route that you wish to take? Yes, I hear a yes from Ian. Chile, Germany, is that the route that we wish to pursue? Okay, so that seems to be the view of the council. And of course, the council is the body which has the jurisdiction on this matter. So it is so decided, and the Secretariat is requested to take note accordingly. May we move on to item 3C, the situation of certain members. I think it will be a follow-on in part to the discussions we have had. As part of this agenda item, we also have to deal with the situation of certain members. Let me give the floor to the Secretary General to provide you with a detailed report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Very quickly, you know that the Executive Committee is the body that keeps on its radar screen political developments in the world, including those that affect the functioning of parliaments. And it brings to you its findings and recommendations regarding how you want to deal with certain situations in the country. So in those countries. So we have, the Executive Committee has gone through a list of countries that have been on its radar screen and has come up with a number of recommendations that I will explain to you briefly. We have Burundi that has been on the radar screen of the Executive Committee and Council for some time now, and the situation continues to be worrisome. There's still no proper agreement between various parties to the conflict in Burundi. There are discussions that are ongoing in Arusha, Tanzania, with a view to finding a political solution to the crisis. The Executive Committee analyzed this situation and continued and suggested that you continue to keep it under your radar screen and reaffirm the offer of the IPU to serve as a forum for mediation, inclusive dialogue between all the parties involved in the conflict. You remember that when you met in Dhaka, you offered to mediate talks in Geneva between political players who are in the country and those who, for the time being, cannot go back to Burundi for a variety of reasons. So, Mr. President, the recommendation from the Executive Committee is that the IPU remains seized of the Burundi dossier and continue to work with the authorities to see how a political and peaceful settlement can be found to the crisis in Burundi. You may wish to seek the endorsement of Council, Mr. President.
May we endorse as the Council the recommendation of the Secretary General and also as discussed in the Executive Committee with regard to Burundi. I see, who is that? Is that Burundi? Burundi, you would like to say something? Yes, you have the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Merci pour la parole.
Thank you for the floor. What I wanted to point out here was that the Secretary-General may not be correctly informed. Things are going very well in Burundi. He refers to dialogue. There was an inter-Burundian dialogue internally in the country, but there was also a dialogue in Arusha. And for the moment, we're still awaiting the conclusions of that. So this reference to different parties, there is no belligerence in Burundi. This is why we use the term dialogue rather than negotiations. It's an inter-Burundian dialogue rather than negotiations. We do not need a mediator. We have a facilitator, not a mediator. So I think the terminology is important there. For now, it's only those in favour of the putsch who are unable to sit down with the government. They're not willing to sit down with the government at all. But apart from that, all those who were in exile are able to re-enter Burundi without any difficulty. There were leaders who were outside the country who are now back in the country. There were ordinary citizens who had left and are now coming back in huge numbers. They're flocking back. So perhaps the Secretary General does not have up-to-date information. Perhaps you could go to Burundi to visit as President of the National Assembly. I'm not aware of any on-the-ground visits that you may have carried out. Perhaps you should send 2 or 3 people to see exactly what is happening on the ground rather than taking decisions which do not take account of the reality.
Duly noted, and the Secretary General has made due note of your comments. Shall we now move on to the next country, Parliament?
Thank you very much, Burundi, for that additional information. As the President has said, we've taken due note of that and will continue to engage with the authorities of Burundi to obtain as much information as possible on what is obtaining in the country. And of course, we will consult with other relevant stakeholders, including the United Nations system. Thank you. We move on to Cambodia. Cambodia, Mr. President, came up for a lot of discussion because you had received reports of alleged efforts to shrink the political space in Cambodia. Many reports had come to the attention of the Executive Committee that there were human rights violations in Cambodia, that the opposition was not allowed to perform its functions, and that some members of the opposition had been prosecuted and jailed. Some have left the country. And when you looked at the situation, you said that the IPU should continue to engage in a dialogue with the authorities to ensure that the atmosphere is appeased in a manner that would allow for free and fair elections to take place in 2018, which includes allowing space for the opposition to exercise its powers and responsibilities, Mr. President. So the Executive Committee asked you in particular to continue the dialogue with the authorities of Cambodia to this effect. So you may wish to consult Council on that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. There is a lot of concern regarding Cambodia and the shrinking of space for the opposition. I met very briefly the Cambodian delegation this morning, and I have said that we would like to have a chance to sit down with them. So I would like to come back and report to you in the next session of the Governing Council. I think it is important to engage with Cambodia. The allegations that we have, in fact, are quite serious. A particular political party is apparently not being allowed to function. The space has not been created. The leader of that party has been convicted, and it has been said that the party whose leader has been convicted cannot in any way use any photos, any speeches, any words of the convicted leader. So I think it is very important for us to have that discussion, and I look forward to doing that and reporting back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. If that is the endorsement of Council, we can move on. But I would like to point out that the Committee on Human Rights of Parliamentarians is examining a number of cases of alleged violations of human rights of parliamentarians in Cambodia, and will be reporting to Council on the 18th of October. Thank you.
I acknowledge the delegation of Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation in Cambodia, if you listen to the news from foreign countries, you think that the Cambodian really in bad shape. But in fact, the situation in Cambodia is normal, just like another country. The people who in jail, they are not because of political reason. they commit crime against the law in Cambodia. And the Cambodian problem had to be solved by the Cambodian people themselves. And it seemed that the foreigners, including some members of the IPU, encouraged the opposition party to rise up against the government. As you know, we could solve our own problem. Only the people who commit crime that they were put in jail. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for that clarification, Cambodia. As I mentioned in my remarks, these are allegations that we have had, which is why we wish to engage with you and find out more. Since we are speaking on this, it has been brought to my attention that Samura Tiolong, who is a member of parliament from Cambodia and chair of the second standing committee, her name was actually not included in the initial delegation list that we received. Subsequently, when the IPU went back and requested her name to be included, it was included, but she is not here, apparently because she cannot be traced. Can you please add some clarity to that?
Thank you, Mr. President. The President of the Foreign Commission and the National Assembly tried to look for her, but we cannot get in touch with her at all. She's out of the country for a long time. And then finally, after you sent a letter, we tried to get in touch with her through another member, and we invite her to come and join us, and she said she's not going to join us, but she's going to want to hire somebody in her place. This is not her decision to send somebody in her place. It's the decision of the Parliament of Cambodia. Thank you, sir.
Understood, but as you are aware that when someone is elected to a standing committee from a parliament of the membership, it is expected that he or she will be part of the delegation. Unfortunately, when we received the delegation list from you, her name was not included. And then we came back to you, then her name was included, and now we are not able to trace her. So if I may ask you, why was her name not included in the first place?
Her name, like just I told you, that we were looking for her to see if she could come and join us, because usually we always have two parties to come here, the ruling party and opposition party all the time. As you know, every year, every IPU conference, we always come with two parties. But this time we cannot locate her because she went out of the country. She did not really work. She is a member of the National Assembly, but she not really fulfill her job as a member of the National Assembly, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one final point before I move on. You see, whether or not you're able to find her, she should be in the list of the delegation regardless, because it is not a question of whether somebody is willing to come. She is obligated to come because she is a chair of a standing committee. So that is why I asked that question, but we will interact more with you and try to have more clarity. Thank you. I would like to move on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. We move on to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As you will remember, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there was a political accord in December 2016 which provided for elections to the presidency of the country and to parliament to take place by the end of 2017. The accord also called for the appointment of a consensual prime minister. The information we have currently, and that was tabled before the executive committee, is that there is a prime minister in place, but that prime minister is not the subject of a consensus. There is also uncertainty over the organization of elections before the end of the year. In fact, we have received information that the relevant authorities in the country have said that the conditions are not yet ripe for holding elections before the end of the year. As you know, this is the contentious issue between the various political actors in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mr. President, the Executive Committee took note of this information and decided that it would recommend to Council to continue to press upon the authorities in the Democratic Republic of the Congo to implement that political accord and organize elections as foreseen in order to bring stability back to the country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are we comfortable with that, with regard to the DRC? Thank you. We move on.
Eritrea, Mr. President, we have not made any much progress about Eritrea in terms of obtaining relevant information on what is happening in Eritrea. You know that this has been a major challenge for all of us, but we also know that the little information that is coming out of Eritrea is not very reassuring, especially in respect of a number of members of parliament who have been thrown into jail or allegedly killed. These cases are before the Committee on Human Rights of Parliamentarians, and I remember that when you had your meeting in Dhaka, you urged countries that may have links with Eritrea to help the IPU to obtain more information on the political developments in the country so that we can see how the IPU can help along the democratic process in Eritrea. So you took note of this situation, Mr. President, and Executive Committee suggested that the IPU continue to be seized of Eritrea.
Thank you. Duly noted. Are there any comments? Move on, please.
Gambia. Gambia is one country on which we can report on positive developments. You remember when you met the last time, we reported that there had been presidential elections in the Gambia, and initially there had been attempts by the outgoing president to not recognize the results of the elections. He subsequently recognized the results of the elections and went into exile, allowing for his successor to be inaugurated. Elections also were taking place at the same time as you were meeting in Dhaka for Parliament. Those elections went on smoothly, and they now have a properly constituted Parliament in the Gambia that is performing its duties as foreseen in the Constitution. So, Mr. President, the Executive Committee took note of these developments, these positive developments, and suggested that the IPU take the Gambia off the list of those countries that it is monitoring on a continuous basis.
Thank you very much. And Council, here we have a very clear example of Parliament that we have been engaged with for a number of years. It has come up in the radar screen a number of times, and now we are happy to say that we feel the situation has improved to the point that we can take them off the list. Is that also your desire? Okay, thank you.
Guinea-Bissau, Mr. President, Guinea-Bissau, as you will remember, is a country that has been embroiled in institutional crisis since 2014. And this is in particular due to infighting within the ruling party in Guinea-Bissau. And this has reflected on the functioning or non-functioning of the parliament. We do understand that the parliament is in a stalemate, has been in a stalemate since 2014, so it's not been meeting regularly since 2014. Mr. President, on several occasions, we have engaged with the Speaker of the Parliament of Guinea-Bissau, who has sought IPU's support in promoting dialogue in the country with a view to finding a mutually accepted political solution to the crisis. We have subsequently reached out to the authorities of Guinea-Bissau, including the Speaker, proposing that if all the sides are ready, the IPU would offer its mediation. We have not yet received that confirmation. I met with the Speaker of the Parliament recently, a couple of weeks ago in Africa, and he told me that he was going to respond to us, and I do understand that that response is positive. If that's the case, Mr. President, Executive Committee may recommend to Council that the IPU pursue its efforts to help mediate the crisis in Guinea-Bissau and report to Council at a later stage.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. So that is the recommendation with regard to Guinea-Bissau. Proceed accordingly. Thank you.
Libya, Mr. President, Libya is another case that is on your radar screen. we all know that there are at least 2 parliaments in Libya, one internationally recognized, including by the IPU, and that's the House of Representatives that sits in Tobruk. Then you have the General National Congress, which is the precursor to the House of Representatives that would have been disbanded following the elections to the House of Representatives. But the General National Congress has not been disbanded. It continues to function, and there have been a series of attempts to resolve the political and institutional crisis in Libya, including through the United Nations Special Envoy for Libya. These negotiations are ongoing. Mr. President, during the EXCOM's deliberations, you took note of these developments and expressed the hope that the ongoing talks between the various parties in Libya would come to some successful conclusion, and you expressed the wish to continue to engage with the recognized parliament within the IPU, the House of Representatives, and see how we can be supportive of them in coming up with a mutually accepted solution to the crisis in Libya. So I do understand that there is a delegation from Libya in this assembly, and so we may wish to ask Council to continue to encourage us to engage in that dialogue with them.
So continued engagement with Libya is the recommendation, and that is how we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move on to the Maldives. This is another case where you have expressed strong concern over political developments in the country. Many reports that are reaching us are not reassuring. You and I have engaged with both the governing party and the opposition parties in the Maldives in order to have a balanced picture of the situation. The situation is that there has been a crisis in the Maldives since an impeachment motion was moved against the current Speaker of Parliament. That motion, according to what we do understand, was supposed to be tabled before Parliament for discussion in July, on the 24th of July 2017. From the reports we get, apparently that motion was not tabled, and that since then Parliament has been under siege by the military and political and the police authorities, and the information we have is that the opposition are not being allowed to participate fully in the parliamentary proceedings. Some members of the opposition party have been prosecuted, and several of them have been jailed on various counts, including obstruction of police duty and bribery and corruption. And the feeling from the opposition is that the governing party is doing everything to incapacitate the opposition parties in view of elections that are going to take place next year. Obviously, this is not the view of the governing party, which thinks that the government is doing its work as it should be. They cannot condone corruption or illegal activity. But then, Mr. President, recently you and we met with members of the governing party in Geneva. We have also received reports from the opposition party, and we're continuing this dialogue between all the sides. The executive committee, when examining this situation, expressed its concern over the worsening political situation in that country and suggested that the IPU remain seized and continue to dialogue with all sides in order to ensure that the political processes in the Maldives can be carried out in a fair and equitable manner so that the will of the people can be reflected. I wish to point out, Mr. President, that you and I were able to convince the government to release one of the members of parliament that was under prosecution to travel. He was released to travel abroad for treatment because we had written to the head of state and to the minister, the relevant minister, and they allowed him to travel out on humanitarian grounds. So we think that sometimes there are positive signs, and the IPU should continue to monitor the situation and engage with the authorities of the Maldives on all sides in order to find a balanced solution to the problems there in the Maldives. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Maldives, of course, is a major challenge, and especially because we have elections coming up next year. It's presidential elections followed by the parliamentary elections. We will be meeting with the Speaker of the Maldives Assembly. here in St. Petersburg, and hopefully we will have more updates. We will also continue to engage with the opposition, because I think that is something that we should be doing, because we are always trying to promote dialogue between the two. So we will hopefully have further updates for you. Thank you. Please proceed.
Philippines, Mr. President, the Philippines is on this list in the name of parliamentary solidarity because there is a particular case of human rights of a member of parliament that are alleged to have been infringed upon, who is currently in jail, Senator De Lima, and the IPU has been actively engaged in investigating her case, and we have recently sent a mission to the Philippines, a mission of the Committee on Human Rights of Parliamentarians, and I understand that there will be a report tabled before Council on the 18th on this particular case, and the IPU mission at the time they met in Lima said that there was not conclusive evidence that she was involved in any wrongdoing, and asked that she should be released so that she can participate fully in her parliamentary duties. This matter will come before Council, as I've said, and at that stage, Mr. President, you may want to take a decision on how this case proceeds from now on.
Okay, are we comfortable? Is everyone comfortable with that recommendation and those comments? Fine, we move ahead.
Mr. President, Executive Committee examined South Sudan where the country has been involved in what we call a fratricidal war. There has been a bloody conflict between various parties within Sudan, and the situation so far has not been resolved. We know that there are efforts that are being made, including by the United Nations, and I do understand that there's a South Sudan delegation here, and we hope to proceed discussions with them. But the Executive Committee recommended that we take note of the troubling situation in South Sudan, including the vast numbers of displaced persons, famine in the country, generally the humanitarian situation, and that we continue to monitor developments and engage with the authorities and see how the IPU can be supportive. Thank you.
Okay, so that's on South Sudan. No comments? Move ahead, please.
Syria, Mr. President, we are happy to report that when the Executive Committee met in Dhaka in April, was it in April, they decided to set up a working group on Syria in light of developments that had taken place in Syria regarding the armed conflict in that country. And the idea was to position the IPU as a key player in helping to resolve the conflict in Syria in a political way, and also to envisage post-conflict Syria. So the working group was established, and members of that working group visited Geneva to have discussions with the UN Special Envoy for Syria, as well as with some relevant Syrian stakeholders in Geneva. The committee, the working group, which is chaired by Russian Senator Konstantin Kosachev, also had meetings here following discussions in the Executive Committee, and we do understand that there is a work plan that has been put in place that would include intensive consultations with relevant stakeholders, intensive consultations with the Parliament of Syria, with a view to identifying concrete action that the organization can take, including the establishment of an institutional framework for post-conflict Syria. The committee, I do understand, is also envisaging a possible mission to Syria to witness what is happening on the ground. Mr. President, I believe that the Council may wish to take note of these developments and continue to support the work of the working group and the Executive Committee. Thank you.
Yes, members of the Council, this is one instance where the Executive Committee, through the working group, is trying to make a positive contribution. We are also in close contact with the United Nations. Syria is a conflict which has been dragging on for a long time, but now that the war is hopefully coming to an end, we understand that 90% of the territory of Syria has been freed from the influence of Daesh and Al-Qaeda, So this is really the time when we have to move forward. And I think the working group has done some excellent work in this regard. And may I invite Konstantin Kosachev, who is one of the vice presidents of the IPU and leading initiator as far as the working group is concerned, to very briefly update the Council on developments that have taken place. You have the floor, Konstantin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. President and Secretary General, for this presentation, and especially for the excellent assistance we have received from the Secretariat for the arrangements, practical arrangements to go ahead with the activities of this working group on Syria. The Executive Committee has approved the plan of actions for the working group, which we have worked out together with other members of this group, and the first position in this action plan is about using this assembly in St. Petersburg to have bilateral meetings, the working group on one side and the relevant delegations from the national parliaments of the region, the delegation from the Syrian parliament in the first hand, but the delegations from Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Turkey, Oman and others who are present here in St. Petersburg in order to update these delegations and the national parliaments about our plans and to receive further information as well as new ideas about how to proceed. The common conviction of the members of the group is that we have a chance to do something more positive in terms of the political de-escalation in Syria only in case if we stay neutral, and by saying neutral I mean not taking any part in this conflict, to meet any interested side in Damascus, definitely the president of Syria, the parliament of Syria, the different factions which are represented in the national parliament, the opposition inside and outside of Syria, and to try to convince all of them that the political process in this country is the only option, and that this process should be based on the decisions by the Security Council of the United Nations, in the first hand the resolution 2254 from the 18th of December 2015. So I just want to ask once again the national delegations of the relevant parliaments to use this opportunity while being in St. Petersburg and to hold bilateral meetings with our working group. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Konstantin, for that brief summary. I know that that doesn't actually capture the complexity and all of the work that you have done, but we certainly wish you and the working group well, and you have the full support of the membership of the IPU. Thank you. Martin.
Thank you. Mr. President, I understand that the speaker, the newly elected speaker of the Syrian parliament is present at this assembly. You may wish to welcome him and urge him to continue to offer his cooperation in the context of the working group on Syria.
Do we have the honorable speaker, the newly elected speaker? I met him briefly last night from Syria. Would you please stand up, sir? Okay. Will you please stand up? We want to welcome you to the assembly, and we look forward to your complete support and assistance to the work of the working group. Thank you. Would you like to, Honorable Speaker, I mean, we can certainly expect your full support and cooperation with regard to the workings of the working group. I take it that that is so? Yes. Your full support from the Syrian parliament to the work of the working group. Yes, thank you. شكرا.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. شكرا إذا كلمة واحدة لمدة دقيقة.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I would like to take the floor briefly, if I might. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, I would like to thank both of you and indeed all of my colleagues for this warm welcome. Let me take this opportunity to thank all delegations and colleagues here present for your welcome. It is an honor for me to participate in this 137th Assembly of the IPU. The Syrian Parliament has always been an active member of the IPU. I'm honored by your welcome and would like to reiterate our commitment to cooperating with you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much for that reassurance that the working group will be extended all possible support and cooperation from the Syrian Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move on to Thailand. Thailand is an example of the results of engagement of the IPU with a member parliament. You remember Thailand has been in a transitional phase since 2014, and you've engaged with the Transitional Legislative Assembly of Thailand with a view to agreeing on a roadmap towards the organization of elections that would return the country to constitutional normalcy. We have constantly kept Thailand under review and have received updates on political development in the country. And as we know it today, and as I reported to the Executive Committee, Mr. President, the Constitution of Thailand has now been promulgated. Actually, it was promulgated while we're still in Dhaka. And according to that Constitution, the Constitutional Drafting Committee and the National Legislative Assembly have to come up with a legislative framework for the organization of elections within 420 days. That is about 14.5 months. And if we calculate from May, those 14 months will expire by August or September 2018, which means that as things stand now, elections are foreseen in August or September 2018. We do understand that the Constitutional Drafting Committee and the Legislative Assembly have been hard at work. They have already drafted and promulgated 5 out of the 10 organic laws that are provided for in the Constitution with a view to organization of elections. And we do understand also that they have put in place a mechanism for drafting strategies for reforms, institutional reforms, as well as a development plan for the country, which will help, of course, implement the new development agenda. So, Mr. President, the Executive Committee took note of this and continue to encourage the authorities in Thailand to work towards the deadlines that they themselves have agreed with a view to organizing elections that will return the country to constitutional normalcy. You may wish to ask Council to endorse this.
Yes, so we certainly look forward to seeing the elections in Thailand by the last quarter of next year. That is how things are progressing, and we look forward to that, and we record the date accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We go on to Turkey. Turkey, just to report to you, to add to what you already know about the attempted coup that took place in July last year, which led to a number of extraordinary measures in the country, over which you expressed deep concern when it came to the treatment meted out to members of parliament and political leaders. The IPU has remained seized of this dossier, and we do have a number of cases of human rights of parliamentarians that we have been monitoring. The Committee on the Human Rights of Parliamentarians recently delegated an observer to trial of a senior political official in Turkey. The findings of that trial observation are being considered by the Committee on Human Rights of Parliamentarians, and I believe that they will report to Council on Wednesday on their findings regarding the situation in Turkey. So, Mr. President, the Executive Committee may recommend to Council that you remain seized of this issue and express solidarity with members of Parliament in Turkey, and hope that the pending cases can be resolved in a fashion that is as speedy and satisfactory as possible.
So it is so recommended, and I take it Council duly takes note and accepts that. Thank you. We move forward.
Thank you, Mr. President. We go on to Venezuela. I see the Venezuela delegation is engaged in discussions. Maybe you want to invite them to take their seats so that we can discuss this carefully.
May I request Venezuela to take your seats, please? The Venezuelan delegation, please take your seats, because we are discussing Venezuela now, and there is something that you may wish to add. So please take your seats. Thank you. Go ahead, Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Venezuela is a case that has been under review by the IPU, and some members referred to the situation in Venezuela today and stressed the importance of parliamentary solidarity. Venezuela is one such country where parliamentary solidarity is required, because you have a situation in Venezuela on which we have reported to the Executive Committee and to Council, where Parliament, elected in December 2015, is not performing its duties as it should as a result of pressure from other arms of state, including the government and the judiciary. On several occasions, the Parliament has reported to the IPU on all the restrictions that are being placed on members of Parliament in the performance of their duties. You have discussed this matter, and the situation has worsened in recent months when, following your conference or your assembly in Dhaka, there were street demonstrations against the regime of Mr. Maduro because he had, you want to?
Members of the Council, we are considering the situation with regard to certain parliaments. Can we please keep the chatter down? There is too much talk which doesn't allow everyone to hear clearly what is being deliberated. If there are important discussions, and I know this is a forum for bilateral discussions, please find a convenient room to do that, and we seek your cooperation in this regard. Can everyone please be seated so that we may proceed with the business of the Council? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I said, since April or May this year, the situation has taken a turn for the worse when President Maduro announced his plans to convene a Constituent Assembly, which, although provided by the Constitution, is challenged by certain segments of the society on account of the fact that the manner in which it's being convened and the plans behind it are suspicious or dubious, to say the least. So you've had popular demonstrations which have unfortunately led to lots of deaths of innocent Venezuelans. Mr. President, the IPU has been informed on a constant basis on the travels of the Parliament in Venezuela, the plans by the Constituent Assembly to usurp some or all of the powers of the National Assembly. And here again, Mr. President, you and I have had to issue strong statements in support of the popularly elected institution, parliamentary institution in Venezuela. We have on record on several occasions where we have stated the importance of preserving the integrity of the National Assembly, and we have even urged the regime not to go ahead with the Constituent Assembly elections in the interest of stability and peace in the country. But things are still not clear. We have a delegation from Venezuela that is present here, and that delegation, we do understand the President of the Assembly himself was supposed to be here, and we were informed by him that there were travel restrictions on his person, that he couldn't leave the country. The Secretary General has sought to verify this information. The reaction of the state authorities is that the Speaker himself is under no restrictions to travel, but discussions with the Cambodian delegation, the Venezuelan delegation lead to the fact that if he were to travel abroad, he may not be allowed to go back to the country, or his passport may be invalidated. So that is where we are now, Mr. President. Your committee looked at this matter and continued to express strong worries about what is happening in Venezuela. You are reaffirmed your support for the parliamentary institution, the National Assembly in Venezuela, and discouraged any attempts to tamper with the manner in which that institution is functioning. You recommended that the IPU continue to be seized of this matter and do whatever it can do to promote parliamentary solidarity so the parliament in that country can function in an unimpeded, unobstructed manner. Mr. President, you may wish to consult Council.
Council, we have a report on Venezuela. Once again, can I please request everyone to sit down? Members of the Council, we seek your cooperation. Can everyone please settle down and keep the noise down? Thank you. So on Venezuela, you have heard the Secretary General's report. It is a very worrying situation. We stand firmly with the people and with the Assembly of Venezuela. We are deeply, deeply disappointed and disturbed that the visit that was planned and the visit for which we were assured of all government support has not taken place, and we are very sorry to report that the government has not kept its commitment with regard to facilitating the report. So we continue to engage, and we stand in solidarity with the constitutionally elected Assembly. Is that also the position of all of the Council, members of the Council? Thank you. Move ahead, please.
Yemen, Mr. President, Yemen, you'll be relieved to know is the last case. Yemen, as you know, is in a war, state of war, and the Parliament has been a victim of that war. We currently know that there are two factions of the Parliament, one in Sana'a and the other one based in Aden. You have discussed this situation, Mr. President, in the Executive Committee, and the question that has arisen often is which faction of the Parliament is legitimate. You have taken note of the fact that all the members, whether they are in Sana'a or Aden, were elected in 2003, and that because of the current political situation and otherwise in Yemen, no fresh elections have taken place. When you met in Dhaka, you froze the participation of Yemen in the proceedings of the IPU until you could ascertain the legitimacy of the Parliament, the status of the Parliament. And you were given the mandate, Secretary General and you were given the mandate to pursue investigations with a view to obtaining facts that would help the governing bodies to take a decision. You want to?
Yes, so we proceed that way with Yemen.
Yeah. Mr. President, let me just conclude. We have, further to Dhaka, had discussions with Yemeni authorities, both in Sana'a and in Aden. Those are based in those two cities. You yourself have met with representatives of both factions in Geneva, and you have identified an entry point to engagement with the Yemeni authorities regarding the commitment by the Parliament to facilitate access to humanitarian assistance. We do understand that both factions are agreeable to this and are committed to working with the IPU in this respect. But you are continuing discussions, Mr. President, with your colleagues with a view to unifying the various factions of the Parliament in Yemen so that you can have a single interlocutor as the institutional member of the IPU. Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. I take it that is also the view of the Council. Now, I really have to ask everyone to please settle down. We are in a Council session of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Can you please all settle down? Thank you. I would now like to move on, and we have the report of the President. This is in fact my report since the 200th session of the Governing Council. There is a detailed report which is available with each of you. What I would try to do is just summarize, because this doesn't really capture all of the activities, but certain visits, certain trips, certain events that I've attended are in fact covered. And as is usual, I have been in constant touch with the Secretary General and the Secretariat. We have been communicating sometimes even 2 or 3 times a week on various issues. The first report, or the first visit that I undertook after the 200th session of the General Council was on the 26th of April, when I addressed the regional seminar of young parliamentarians of Asia-Pacific region in Colombo. And this was to do with terrorism, violent extremism, and steps that we can do to correct that. We of course highlighted that pluralism, diversity, and inclusiveness were central values of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. And we focused on youth engagement, youth participation, and in politics as well as in Parliament. And this was a very well-attended session. and I think we covered a lot of good ground. Of course, as I mentioned yesterday, here in the Russian Federation in Sochi, there is a World Youth Festival that is taking place, so the engagement with the youth continues. From 6th to 8th of May, I was in Kathmandu in Nepal, where I had been invited to deliver the keynote address at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health South Asia Tobacco Control Leadership Program. You're all aware that tobacco control is a major challenge, especially in South Asia, and it takes away more than 1 million lives a year just in South Asia. In fact, when we had the first Speaker Summit on the SDGs of South Asia in Dhaka, this was the theme, so this was really continuing with the theme and linking the importance of tobacco control in context of Agenda 2030. From there, I proceeded on 11th of May with the Secretary General to participate in the regional seminar for Asia-Pacific parliaments on the SDGs in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Vietnam, as you know, has been a very strong parliament in terms of engaging with the Sustainable Development Goals. And in fact, the Hanoi Assembly came out with a declaration prior to the adoption of the SDGs, which was really a defining declaration in terms of how Parliament should be engaging with this. We also saw the various initiatives that Vietnam is taking with regard to climate change and mitigating the impacts of climate change. I was invited to attend the 42nd parliamentary session of the Canadian House of Commons in Ottawa in June. I thank Canada for its strong and unwavering support for the IPU and the quality of the Canadian MPs' contributions to IPU debates. There is also a very vibrant IPU group within the Canadian Parliament. I met with speakers Jeff Regan and George Fury, and I discussed with them further cooperation between the IPU and Canada. Last but not least, I attended the question period in the Senate, where Senator Dawson introduced a motion to discuss the SDGs in the Canadian Senate. During the same exercise in the House of Commons, I was introduced to the members and followed its lively discussions. Moving on, it was July in New York, in the USA. As a member of the high-level steering group for Every Woman, Every Child, I was invited to the launch of the first progress report on the global strategy. I spoke on the theme, the role of parliaments in unlocking and leveraging the full potential of women, children, and adolescents, and the IPU's efforts in delivering on the global strategy. The Secretary General and I were then invited to attend the inauguration ceremony of President Rouhani in Tehran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, on 4th of August. In addition to this official function, we held talks with the Speaker of the Islamic Parliament of Iran, Mr. Larijani. We discussed the situation in Syria and Iran's role in the region. We also discussed the conflict in Yemen, which was taking on dramatic proportions with recent outbreaks of cholera having been reported. Common to both conflicts was a woeful humanitarian situation which must be improved to save the lives of millions of innocent civilians. I then traveled to Riga, Latvia from 4 to 6 September at the invitation of the Speaker of the Parliament. The Latvian Parliament is one of the oldest IPU members, having first joined the organization in 1923 and continued until 1936. And after a long hiatus, again in 1991, after the fall of communism. I met with the President of the Republic, a former parliamentarian who had attended IPU assemblies in Quito and Quebec City. I also met with the Deputy Speaker of Parliament and Chair of the Human Rights Committee. The latter expressed a keen interest in engaging in the universal periodic review process of the UN Human Rights Council. On September 8 at IPU headquarters, I had meetings with delegations from Yemen. As the Secretary General mentioned, we had a delegation from Sana'a. We also had a delegation from Aden. And we tried to talk to both of them and find common ground and a possible entry point through the humanitarian crisis. Those discussions continue. We have had positive feedback from the Parliament in Sana'a, and we are taking that forward. The UN General Assembly at UN headquarters in New York from 18 to 22nd September, again took me back there. I participated in the meeting of the UN Secretary General's high-level steering group for every woman, every child on 18 September and renewed and reiterated IPU's commitment to this wonderful initiative and spoke about the important role of parliaments in leveraging health as a key driver in development and the need to focus in particular on women's, child and adolescent health in humanitarian and fragile settings. During my stay in New York, I also had brief interactions with the UN Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed. On the 30th of September, I visited the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh near its border with Myanmar. And there you see some of those pictures. It was extremely distressing and disturbing to hear firsthand the harrowing tales of brutality and persecution from those who are lucky to survive the onslaught and make it to Bangladesh. About 70% of the refugees were women and children, and preliminary reports indicated about 50,000 women were pregnant and due to give birth over the next few months. Over half a million Rohingya refugees have crossed into Bangladesh in just 1 month, and more are on the way as persecution and killings continue unabated and villages are being burnt. While the government of Bangladesh and its Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, as well as the people of the country, should be commended for opening its borders and embracing the Rohingyas, an urgent solution to the problem in terms of stopping the persecution in Myanmar, as well as ensuring the safe and speedy return of all of the Rohingyas to Myanmar must be found. The pictures that you see, if we can just go back to the previous picture, you will see that there are individuals there. And when I spoke to them, I found out there is a lady there who traveled 15 days through a jungle, surviving on vines and leaves to escape the persecution. I met a 7-year-old boy whose parents were shot in his presence, and now they are refugees. And remember, as I mentioned in my speech last night, they are not just refugees, they are also stateless. And this is an overall problem that we have in the world. There are 10 million stateless people who have no rights to education, to healthcare. So I think this is one of the fastest evolving emergency situations in the world, and it deserves the full attention of not just the global parliamentarians, but of also the world. I visited Colombo thereafter at the invitation of the Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament, Mr. Karu Jayasuriya, and attended the special parliamentary session to commemorate the 70th anniversary of parliamentary democracy in Sri Lanka. The President and Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, the Speakers of Parliament of SAARC from Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives and Nepal, and Deputy Speakers from Afghanistan and Pakistan were also in attendance. 70 years of uninterrupted parliamentary democracy is a very special occasion, and it was an honor to represent the IPU. During my short stay in Colombo, I was very pleased and enthused to learn of the work of the Select Committee of the Parliament of Sri Lanka on the SDGs headed by the Deputy Speaker, Mr. Thilanga Somatipala, and how the IPU self-assessment toolkit was considered as an effective tool. On the 5th of October, I met a delegation of parliamentarians from the ruling Progressive Party of the Maldives. We have already heard in detail about the outcome of that, and of course, Maldives continues to be in the radar screen of the IPU. I was also pleased to welcome in Geneva the Speaker of the National Assembly of Kuwait, Mr. Marzouk Al-Ghanim, the House of Parliament on 6th of October. We discussed the humanitarian challenges in various parts of the world, and he reiterated Kuwait's full support and commitment to the value standards of the work and the standards of the IPU. During my stay in Geneva, I met with heads of the various IPU programs and reviewed the arrangements for the 137th Assembly in St. Petersburg. And of course, I was very honored to plant a tree in the House of Parliaments, which will hopefully grow, and this is to mark the 3-year presidency term that I've had. I would like to move on very quickly to 2 more items, which are, I think, very important and will carry forward to the future. One is the IPU TV that was launched in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And we have a short presentation on that. And if we can have the IPU TV presentation on the screen, please.
Yes.
And if the lights could also be dimmed a little.
Oh, yes, yes, you're right. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Can you check if it's mine or if it's somebody?
Volume.
Is considered as a global village nowadays. Here, throwing a little stone somewhere can cause a huge landslide elsewhere. And democracy is the ultimate obsession today, to defend human rights and sovereignty. The Inter-Parliamentary Union, since its inception in 1889, has been the focal point for worldwide parliamentary, working for peace and cooperation among peoples and for the firm establishment of inclusive societies and representative democracy. To this end, under the overall theme of better parliaments and stronger democracy, it fosters contacts, coordination, and the exchange of experience among parliaments and parliamentarians of all countries, considers questions of international interest and concern, and expresses its views on such issues in order to bring about action by parliaments and parliamentarians, contributes to the defense and promotion of human rights, an essential factor of parliamentary democracy and development, contributes to better knowledge of the working of representative institutions and to the strengthening and development of their means of action. To add further momentum to the work of the IPU and leverage the advances in technology and deliver benefits of connectivity to its membership, the 28th President of the IPU mooted the idea of IPU TV in 2016. And this came to fruition a year later when Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, inaugurated IPU TV during IPOU's 136th Assembly in Dhaka, Bangladesh. IPU TV is basically a mobile app to share the work and activities of the IPU. It is a platform to share experiences and good practices among all parliamentarians and parliaments, and enrich their knowledge base and enhance their capacity. Members can upload videos of their work, speech, and thoughts on various issues. They can share photos or moments, or even write blogs on their experiences. These can be made available in both live streaming format or archived form. In addition, the platform has the capacity to cover IPU seminars and conferences in both live streaming and archived form. Though the service includes Parliament members only, and they have the exclusive right to share the contents, IPU TV allows mass people to experience the detail through this app. The vision of IPU TV is to keep all individuals connected at all times, locally and globally. Hence, it has enabled the option to alert users through push notifications. In addition, it has a future plan to implement features on influential personalities of global politics, with their views on various thoughts and activities. IPU TV, welcome to our world.
Thank you very much. There is also detailed instructions as to how you use the app which is now going to come on. So if you have your smartphones, you can actually do it now as we go through 2 or 3 minutes of the process. Can we have the app section?
Play Store or App Store, type IPU TV in the search area and tap the search icon. When you find it, just tap on the app's icon. Now you can see the app page. There's a green blocked install icon. After completing the installation, the app icon can be viewed on your mobile screen. Tap on the app icon and you will enter the home screen of IPU TV. To see the menu, tap on the hamburger icon. Now you have all sections: news, posts, videos, photos, and member area. To open your account, go to member area and sign up with your email and own created password.
Okay, so that will also be available on the IPU website. So if you have not had a chance to follow the steps, I would encourage you to do so. The other aspect that I wish to draw your attention to before I conclude my activities report is the concept of the Green Assembly. Now, as you know that in the IPU, we have been talking about a sustainable future. We talk about the importance of the environment. We talk about climate change. We talk about mitigating the impacts of climate change. And we have already put in place a number of initiatives, green initiatives within the IPU. It started a year ago with the Paper Smart initiative, where we are trying to generate less paperwork. So everything is on the apps. Even in this assembly, our Russian hosts have actually given us bags that are recyclable. That again goes with the concept of a green assembly. What we did in Dhaka was we calculated the emissions that the assembly caused. So every activity that we have generates a carbon footprint. So as we speak, as we move around, as we come to the venue, as we travel into St. Petersburg, we travel out of St. Petersburg, we are generating a carbon footprint. So a calculation was done of the total emissions that the assembly in Dhaka generated. And based on that, we have found offsets. And the offset is going to be, we are going to distribute improved cook stoves to villages in Bangladesh so that the emissions that have been caused are offset by the savings that we have on emissions. So that way we get to a neutral, carbon neutral assembly. And so we have done that in the case of Bangladesh. We have some instances here in St. Petersburg of the green concept, and I hope that in future we are going to continue with this. Now, any parliament which is interested in having a green event can consult with the IPU Secretariat, who have the complete protocol as to how the emissions are calculated and how we may possibly offset them. I see Pakistan has a question. I acknowledge you, sir.
Pakistan's parliament is today 100% run by solar energy, and in fact during the winters we export electricity to the national grid and do not take any electricity from there. So it's a completely green parliament house.
I think that's a very good example from Pakistan, because if Parliament, the House of People, is setting this example, then this is something that other parliaments can duplicate and follow up. So certainly let us walk the talk. You know, we just don't talk about having a green environment. We as parliamentarians can do a lot in terms of making sure that that is what happens. Thank you, Pakistan, for that. Thank you, our hosts, for having recycling or recyclable bags. And so the trend continues, and we hope when we next meet in Geneva, there are going to be more good practices to report. That, members of the Council, completes my report of activities since the 200th session of the Governing Council. Are there any questions? I assume there are not. So should we move forward? Yeah. Okay, now members of the Council, in terms of the time that we had set for ourselves, it was 2 hours. We started about 15-20 minutes late, so we're really eating into the time of the Assembly. And obviously I don't want to do that. Please bear in mind, and this is a very important announcement for the next elections, for the upcoming elections of the next president of the IPU, the 29th president of the IPU. This is going to be held on Wednesday the 18th. Wednesday the 18th of October, we will have the election. And what we have done is we have brought the time forward. This is not going to be the last agenda item in our business. This is going to take place in the morning, because from past experience we see that a number of delegations leave on the last day. So please be here at 9 o'clock sharp. 9 o'clock sharp on October the 18th, which is a Wednesday, to vote on the elections. May I also just, on a related issue, let you know that on the 17th of October at 4:30 p.m. there will be a Q&A session with both of the candidates from Uruguay and from Mexico. And this is going to be in a venue which is near to this place where we are now. And it'll be a 2-hour session where the two candidates will make a brief presentation for 5 or 7 minutes, and then you will be allowed to ask any questions of the two candidates that you wish. So with that, I think we can bring this session of the Governing Council to a close. And before I do that, the Secretary General would like to make an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make a procedural announcement. The Secretary General is required by the statutes, the rules governing the Governing Council, is required to make an announcement on the quorum. And this is in conformity with Rule 34.2 of the Governing Council. For each session, the quorum shall be established on the basis of the number of council members effectively participating in the first sitting, this sitting. The quorum shall be announced by the Secretary General at that time. And so I wish to announce that present in the room at this first sitting were 200 members. And the quorum will therefore be 101 members for decisions to be taken validly by the Council. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes. So we have on record the quorum that is necessary. So this adjourns this session of the Governing Council. Thank you. May I invite...
Just for your